And we're doing well. Tonight we're going to continue our series called Quarantine. This is our fourth installment in the series, and we've entitled it Easter Underground. And I want to start off by reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28. Matthew, chapter 28. Now after the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. Suddenly there was a severe earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came and rolled away the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were shaken and became like dead men because they were so afraid of him. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He's not here, for he is risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he was lying. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has risen from the dead. He's going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell the disciples. But Jesus met them, saying, "Greetings." They came to him, held on to his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. They will see me there." While they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened. After they had assembled with the elders and formed a plan, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, telling them, "You are to say his disciples came at night and stole his body while we were asleep. If this matter is heard before the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story is told among the Jews to this day. Now I want to read from the Gospel of John, chapter 20. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen clothes lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who was John, who had reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scriptures that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she didn't know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where they have laid him, and I will take him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni." Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her. Verse 19. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. Well, I hope everybody's having a happy Easter. I know it's a little bit of a strange one. I'm certain that you and I will always remember Easter Sunday 2020. I imagine it will stand out in our memory as the years pass. For the first time in our lives, we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ without the pomp and circumstance usually associated with Easter Sunday at our respective churches. There's no need for a crisp new suit and a colorful tie, though I did elect to wear one today. No need for that for Dad. No need for a bright, pretty Easter dress for Mom or frilly new dress and bonnet for little sister. All my life, Easter has been a celebration like no other. In my memories of this day, spring has emerged after the bitter dullness of winter. The earth is once again carpeted in green. Flowers are in full bloom. Bluebonnets coat the Texas hillsides. The solemnity of the Passion Week yields to the joy and celebration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's not how the disciples of Jesus spent the first Easter. After suffering through the excruciating, humiliating, terrifying scene at Golgotha, where the one in whom they had placed their faith and hope was stripped of his clothing and his dignity, mocked and cruelly tortured to death, these men were shaken to their core. To make matters worse, word had spread that someone had stolen the body of Jesus, and the Jewish officials were saying Jesus' disciples were the culprits. These men who had walked with Jesus for more than 3 years, witnessed the miracles that he had done, listened to teaching like no one had ever heard before in human history, and dared to believe in eternal life through him, were now living like outlaws and outcasts, holed up, hiding out in fear of their lives. These guys were practicing social distancing for a very different reason than you and I. The odds of them being captured, indicted, and executed were far greater than the odds of one of us contacting the virus that we fear so much today. They were all but certain their days were numbered, and they really were. What confusion they must have felt. If you look back just a week before, Jesus had been welcomed to Jerusalem by all of the people. There was singing and celebration, a great celebration. They were welcoming him as a king. And now these disciples who had been out in the forefront and been part of that great celebration were huddled together, whispering in hushed tones, fully aware that any sound of human activity from outside those walls could very well be the soldiers' boots on cobblestone, Roman soldiers coming to collect them, drag them away to certain doom. This was the first Easter Sunday, folks, and it was the first Easter underground. 2,000 years later, we find ourselves isolated, avoiding contact with the outside world, facing uncertainty. We wonder, what will the world look like going forward? How many of the freedoms that have been snatched for so-called good reasons today will we actually recover when all of this is over? How will this experience change our society and the way we do life going forward? And then the big overarching question that is on the minds of many Christians is this how the end of the world looks? Is this what John foresaw, or the beginning of what John foresaw in the book of the Revelation? Before you go too far down the rabbit hole of self-pity and think that we're the first people since the apostles to suffer such an Easter, we need to realize that millions of Christians through the centuries have been forced underground to worship. In those early days, they were pursued and persecuted across continents. Paul himself, the great apostle who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, before his conversion, before his name change, when he was Saul, he hunted Christians for a living. In the 3rd century, Christians retreated to the catacombs and held secret services to keep from being gathered up and put on trial for illegal worship. Even today, in places like communist China, persecution of Christians is state-sanctioned. Just a few months ago, on Christmas Day 2019, the Los Angeles Times published an article which they called, "For China's Underground Churches, This is No Easy Christmas." I want to read a snippet of that article. They start off by quoting a Chinese pastor. "Then they start to document you," said the pastor of a large house church in Chengdu, who spoke on the condition of anonymity. "Then your children cannot go to church. Then you have to plant a flag. Eventually, clergy are forced to change their sermons to align with social core values and paste Communist Party slogans on the walls." Having seen that process unfold at other churches, the pastor refused to register his church. Police began standing outside the church daily and following and harassing attendees. In August, his church left its makeshift sanctuary in an office building, breaking into small groups that met in houses instead. Church is not a location, the pastor said. Church is a group of people. His congregation has been preparing for his arrest, hiring lawyers and training members to lead smaller fellowship groups if he and the elders disappear. This wasn't written 50 years ago or 5 years ago. This was written on Christmas Day 2019. Kind of puts what you and I are experiencing into perspective, though, doesn't it? I think my first exposure to the persecution of Christians was when I was a young teen and I was attending a Christian school that was hosted by the church we attended. And part of the required reading was a book called The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. Some of you have probably read it. It's really a Christian classic. And not just a Christian classic, it's a classic. And I want to tell you a little bit about the story of Corrie ten Boom because I'm going to use some quotes from her for tonight's sermon. And rather than tell you the story, I found a good article on her on biography.com, and I just want to read that because it tells the story, encapsulates her life during those tumultuous years. It starts like this. Cornelia Arnolda Johanna ten Boom was born on April 15, 1892 in Haarlem, Netherlands, near Amsterdam. Known as Corrie all her life, she was the youngest child with two sisters, Betsy and Nolly, and one brother, Willem. Their father, Casper, was a jeweler and a watchmaker. Cornelia was named after her mother. The ten Boom family lived in the Beige house in Haarlem in rooms above Casper's watch shop. Family members were strict Calvinists in the Dutch Reformed Church. Faith inspired them to serve society, offering shelter, food, and money to those in need. In this tradition, the family held a deep respect for the Jewish community in Amsterdam, considering them God's ancient people. In May 1940, the German Blitzkrieg ran through the Netherlands and the other Low Countries. Within months, the Nazification of the Dutch people began, and the quiet life of the ten Boom family was changed forever. During the war, the Beige house became a refuge for Jews, students, and intellectuals. The facade of the watch shop made the house an ideal front for these activities. A secret room, no larger than a small wardrobe closet, was built into Corrie's bedroom behind a false wall. The space could hold up to 6 people, all of whom had to stand quiet and still. A crude ventilation system was installed to provide air for the occupants. When security sweeps came through the neighborhood, a buzzer in the house would signal danger, allowing the refugees a little over a minute to seek sanctuary in the hiding place. The entire ten Boom family became active in the Dutch resistance, risking their lives, harboring those hunted by the Gestapo. Some fugitives would stay just a few hours, while others would stay several days until another safe house would be located. Corrie ten Boom became a leader in the Beige movement, overseeing a network of safe houses in the country. Through these activities, it was estimated that 800 Jews' lives were saved. On February 28, 1944, a Dutch informant told the Nazis of the ten Boom's activities, and the Gestapo raided their home. They kept the house under surveillance, and by the end of the day, 35 people, including the entire ten Boom family, were arrested. Although German soldiers thoroughly searched the house, they didn't find the half-dozen Jews safely concealed in the hiding place. The 6 stayed in the cramped space for nearly 3 days before being rescued by the Dutch underground. All ten Boom family members were incarcerated, including Corrie's 84-year-old father, who would die in prison. Corrie and her sister Betsy were remanded to the notorious Ravensbrück concentration camp near Berlin. Betsy died there on December 16, 1944. 12 days later, Corrie was released for reasons not completely known. Hadn't thought about that book in a long time. It was one of the first books to have a major impact on my life as a young boy considering ministry as a profession. The Hiding Place is a classic because it tells an incredible story of her life, but it's also a classic because this amazing woman of faith had an uncanny ability. She mastered the practice of reducing great theological truths into memorable quotes. What I want to do is I want to share some of my favorite quotes from her book, and in so doing, I will give you some Easter Underground practical theology according to Corrie ten Boom. I thought about the book when I thought about this sermon because here we are in isolation, and it reminded me of what she went through in the hiding place. I found 6 quotes that I want to share with you and give you 6 things, 6 theological points to remember during this time of isolation and even afterwards. Number 1, worry gets you nowhere. This is what Corey said. Worrying is carrying tomorrow's load with today's strength, carrying 2 days at once. It is moving into tomorrow ahead of time. Worrying doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It empties today of its strength. You know, I've often thought that worry is like a bad loan with high interest. It's all cost and no benefit. You remember those things that you bought on revolving credit, and by the time you got them paid off, they were either used up or gone or no longer worth anywhere near what you were paying. When you buy things like that, they'll never be worth what you pay. And I'll tell you, worry is exactly the same thing. And I think she encapsulates the strength of that statement when she said, it doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow, it empties today of its strength. It's based on a biblical passage that says, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Tomorrow will take care of itself. That's called living by faith. Worry and faith are mutually exclusive. If you're worrying, you're not practicing faith. And if you're practicing faith, then you're not worrying. The second theological truth I find from the hiding place is this. Security in things is not security at all. This is what Corey said. Hold everything in your hands lightly. Otherwise, it hurts when God pries open your fingers. Wow. Man, when I read that, it hits me hard. Hold everything in your hands lightly. Otherwise, it hurts when God pries open your fingers. David, that great king and shepherd and warrior and general, he told his people in Psalm chapter 20, verse 7, some trust in chariots and others in horses, but we trust in the Lord our God. Listen, I'm as fiercely American as anybody I know. I love the heritage that we own as Americans. But if you think your security is in the Constitution or the government of the United States or any other human document or institution, I'm telling you, you're mistaken. The things we hold so dearly may be pried from our fingers as easily as a pandemic sweeps across international borders. We don't know what tomorrow holds, and we don't know how long we will have the securities that we hold on to so dearly today. Security in things is not security at all. Your security is in the Lord Jesus Christ, and that's what we call eternal security. Because whatever happens, God's got it. Number 3, the third lesson, is this. Less is more, or you could say reduction opens the eyes of realization. This is what she said. You can never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have. Many people have repeated that. Corey was the first one to pen it that I know of. You can never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have. It's true of the human condition that we will hedge our bet. As long as we have something we consider more tangible to lean on, we will. It's when we are reduced to nothing, when you are driven to your knees, when you are out of answers and avenues, that's when you will learn the truth that Jesus really is everything you need. Number 4, prayer is a borderless power. Prayer is a borderless power. This is what she said. What wings are to a bird and sails to a ship, so is prayer to the soul. You can lock a Christian in a prison cell or drive him or her into the catacombs or a safe house or a concentration camp or isolation and social distancing, but you cannot seal off prayer. It seeps through concrete, it soars through space, it saws through the iron bars of fear. Prayer overpowers every predicament, whether it is paving the way out or pushing the person through. Prayer is power. Not the power of the one praying, but the power of the one listening and answering. Listen, the power of prayer is not in your eloquence. When Peter decided he wanted to walk on the water, and as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, everything was fine. Then he took his eyes off Jesus and he sank like a rock. And the waves were tumultuous and terrible. And Peter didn't say, "Oh Lord, we come to you this fine afternoon with the weather all billowing." He didn't go through all of that. All Peter said was, "Lord, help me. God knows what you need. He just wants you to ask for his help, to lean on him, to reach out to him. In this regard, she had another quote. She said, she asked a question, and it's a good one. Is prayer your steering wheel or your spare tire? I think for a lot of us, it's the spare tire, right? It's the emergency hatch. Then she reminded us of something that I think is very weighty. Any concern too small to be turned into a prayer is too small to be made into a burden. Any concern too small to be turned into a prayer is too small to be made into a burden. If it's big enough to burden you, it's big enough to pray about. The fifth lesson that we learned from the hiding place is love hurts. This is the quote that I got from the book. Do you know what hurts so very much? It's love. Love is the strongest force in the world, and when it is blocked, that means pain. There are two things we can do when this happens. We can kill that love so that it stops hurting, but then, of course, part of us dies too. Or we can ask God to open up another route for that love to travel. The temptation during times of trial or loss is to protect your heart, to refuse to risk it. But it's then that love matters most, not just to the ones to whom it is extended, but to you, the one who still gives it. I don't know what pain you've been through. I don't know what loss you've suffered. I don't know what loves you've lost. Where you are, you may be far more isolated than just being isolated from society by a stay-at-home, shelter-at-home order. Maybe you feel an isolation in your soul, an isolation of your heart, and you've loved and lost. You've loved and someone took that love and didn't really appreciate it, and with the breath of unkindness blew it away, and now you're tempted never to love again. But I'm telling you, love is as much for you as it is for whomever you love. Don't seal up your heart. We said last week, God is love. And the only way to know God, the only way to know love is to know God. And the only way to demonstrate God in your life is through love. So that brings me to the sixth and final point, and that is this. Love conquers all. There is no pit, Corey said, there is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still. Whether you're among 12 trembling disciples hidden away in Jerusalem, or a Jew on the run from Nazism and hiding in a closet in the Netherlands, or you're isolated from society because of a virus and a government mandate, whether you're sinking in a river of debt or swimming in a sea of uncertainty, you can be certain the love of God is deeper than the hole in which you were buried. So, let's recap. Worry gets you nowhere. Security in things is not security at all. Jesus Christ is your security. Less is more. Prayer is a borderless power. Love hurts, but love conquers all. The love of God is greater far than tongue or pen can ever tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. The guilty pair, bound down with care, God gave his son to win. His erring child he reconciled and pardoned from his sin. Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade? To write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. O love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure the saints and angels' song. Happy Easter. God bless you and God bless yours. Good night.